The morning started like any other in Alder Ridge. Estates too quiet for a Monday. Clayton Riggs stepped onto his porch with a travel mug in one hand and his wallet in the other. He had an appointment 30 minutes away and just enough time to get there if traffic stayed kind. But then he froze. Right across his driveway sat a lime green Lamborghini Aventador, angled just wrong enough to make backing out impossible. Its scissor doors were shut, engine cold, driver gone. He squinted at it like it was some kind of exotic animal that had wandered onto his property. Bright, loud, not supposed to be there. But this wasn't the zoo. It was his front yard. He glanced down the street. Every other house sat in its perfect suburban silence, trimmed hedges, pristine curbs, not a soul in sight. Except for one person. There she stood, Beverly Danforth, HOA president, arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, sipping iced coffee through a tiny pink straw. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just raised her chin half an inch. Clayton walked slowly down his lawn, boots crunching on the edge of the gravel border. Yours? He asked, motioning to the Lamborghini. She took a long sip. Temporary placement. HOA business. I've got somewhere to be. You'll need to be patient. This is a sanctioned inspection. He looked past her. No clipboard. No other vehicles. No visible signs of anything even remotely official. You're inspecting what? Exactly. She smiled, finally. The slope of your driveway. It might be 2 degrees off code. Clayton stared at her. 2 degrees. Or 3. It's borderline dangerous. He looked back at the car. The way it gleamed under the sun, like it knew it didn't belong but didn't care. Like it was daring him to touch it. This is the 3rd time, he said. I keep logs, Beverly said flatly. I do too. Clayton replied. He turned around and walked back to the house. He didn't slam the door. He didn't throw anything. He just walked to the garage, unlocked the second panel, and turned on the lights. There, under a heavy canvas tarp, sat a piece of his past. Long, wide, hulking. He ran his hand over the edge where metal met memory, the cold, familiar armor of something the HOA would never approve. He didn't need it now. Not yet. But the idea had arrived, and unlike Beverly's Lambo, it wouldn't be going anywhere soon. He sat down in his workshop chair, pulled out a notepad, and began drawing. Measurements, angles, he still remembered the spec sheets. Every bolt, every hydraulic line, because you don't forget the thing that saved your life. And Clayton had been saved more than once inside the belly of a tank. He reached for his phone and hit record. Through the garage window, Beverly's reflection stood, still watching his house, waiting for a reaction. What she got instead was footage, time-stamped, dated, evidence. The 3rd time she blocked him. Same car. Same attitude. This wasn't about a driveway. This was about control. She didn't like the way he kept his porch unpainted. She didn't like his American flag not being community scale. She didn't like that he didn't show up to HOA socials or vote in board meetings. What she did like was power. He stared at the reflection of the car, then walked upstairs to the 2nd floor, opened the curtain just enough to peek through. He saw her take one more look at the house, then turn away and vanish between the hedges. The car stayed behind, and Clayton smiled, not out of amusement, but out of resolve, because if Beverly wanted to play hardball, he was going to show her what armor looked like, and next time she tried to block him, he wouldn't be driving a Ford. The next morning brought no peace, only silence to perfect, to trust. Even the birds didn't sing. Clayton opened the blinds and scanned the street. The Lamborghini was gone. So was Beverly, but the damage, WASN, single quotes T. He stepped outside and found a yellow slip on his mailbox. Notice of non-compliance. Driveway obstruction appeal, denied, filed, signed and stamped. By Beverly Danforth. He hadn't even submitted an appeal. That was her game. She'd pre-denied something just to make a point. But to Clayton, the point was made long ago. This wasn't a personal dispute. This was one person weaponizing an entire system. He folded the notice, slid it into a folder already labeled HOA hostilities, and tucked it into a drawer next to a stack of aerial photos, digital maps, and ordnance specs. If Beverly thought her crown gave her immunity, she was about to find out that some crowns attract lightning. Across the neighborhood, Beverly made her rounds. The HOA clipboard was back, but it was never used to take notes. It was a prop, a performance. She paced from house to house, citing imaginary violations with an air of divine authority. A flower pot out of alignment. A garden gnome too close to the curb. A wind chime that made the wrong kind of sound. One homeowner, a man named Jerry, pleaded for leniency. He was 74, recovering from surgery, and couldn't repaint his fence in time. Beverly's response was simple: hire help. Another neighbor received a citation for visual disruption, which turned out to mean a children's chalk drawing on the sidewalk. Nobody argued anymore. They just nodded and said okay. It was faster, less painful. But inside, frustration brewed at the mailbox station that evening. Beverly ran into Miriam, a young mother holding her toddler in one arm and a grocery bag in the other. "I heard you've got Clayton on your radar," Miriam said, half joking. "He's uncooperative." Beverly replied coldly, "He's a vet. He's quiet. Keeps to himself. He painted his porch the wrong shade of wood stain and won't respond to community invitations. You give a little slack to one, they all take rope." Miriam held her gaze for a moment, then turned to leave. As she walked away, Beverly muttered, "The rules apply to everyone." Clayton, meanwhile, was reading every rule in the depths of his basement. He had unfolded the original HOA charter, acquired through a quiet records request. Over time, the board had added pages, footnotes, amendments, but hidden in the original copy were contradictions, loopholes, and his favorite. Section 9.4. Historic Display Clause. It stated that any temporary, educational, or historically significant item could be present on a property for up to 48 hours without board approval, so long as it did not cause measurable harm or block emergency services. He underlined the sentence twice. It wasn't a green light, but it was something close. Later that night, he called Rico. "Still have it? Still works." Rico replied, "Mostly. Can I borrow it? You serious?" "I'm tired of her games." There was a pause. Then Rico laughed. "I'll bring her to you." "You got a trailer?" "I've got the same trailer we used at Fort Polk." Rico's voice went quiet. "All right, man. I'll tow it in by Friday. You got the place for it." "Do now." When he hung up, Clayton didn't feel excitement. He didn't feel revenge. He felt focus. This wasn't about intimidation. It was about drawing a line. A clean one. One Beverly wouldn't be able to cross without climbing over 100,000 pounds of American steel. By Thursday morning, the storm hadn't arrived, but the pressure had. The sky hung heavy and gray. Still, Clayton felt something shifting in the air. Something unspoken. He didn't rush. That wasn't his way. He sharpened the lawnmower blades, oiled the gate hinges, changed the bulbs on the front porch light, not because he had to, but because everything had to be ready. At 10:07 a.m., his phone vibrated, a single text from Rico. "Rolling out 80A3 HRS. Make space." Clayton nodded to himself and slid the phone into his back pocket. His face gave nothing away. Outside, the neighborhood ticked along. Sprinklers clicked. A jogger passed by with earbuds in. Across the street, Beverly stood by a trash can, clipboard in hand, frowning at a neighbor's garbage lid that wasn't fully closed. Her lips moved as she made a note. He watched from his kitchen window as she walked up the steps to Jerry's house. The older man still recovering from surgery. Beverly knocked 3 times. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. Instead of walking away, she circled around back. Clayton's hands clenched the edge of the sink. 10 minutes later, she reappeared carrying a measuring tape and what looked like a plastic level. She stood in Jerry's backyard for several minutes, inspecting the fence. Clayton stepped onto his back porch. She caught his eye from across the property line and held his gaze longer than usual. No words, just that smug, knowing smile. The kind of smile that had nothing behind it but control. She turned her back and walked away. He stayed there, motionless, until she vanished behind her hedges. At 12:43 p.m., a low rumble stirred the stillness. It wasn't loud at first, more like a vibration in the bones. Then came the sound of chains on metal. Tires hissing. Steel creaking. Clayton walked down the driveway and stopped at the curb. Rico's flatbed trailer turned the corner like a battleship entering port. It was long, slow, and wide, and the thing riding on it made Beverly's Lamborghini look like a toy left in the sandbox. The M60 patent tank wasn't pretty. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. 40 tons of reinforced confidence, every bolt speaking louder than any HOA fine could dream of. Neighbors peeked out windows. Some stepped outside, pretending to water plants. One man, clearly a veteran, stood straight as a board, and saluted quietly as the tank rolled past. Rico hopped out of the truck with his usual cigarette and smile. "You got a permit for this?" he asked with a grin. Clayton handed him a printed copy of Section 9.4 from the HOA Charter. "Historic display. Educational. 2-day max. It's legal." Rico smirked. "Good enough for me." Together they guided the tank into position, not on the street, not on the sidewalk, but dead center. In Clayton's driveway, it faced forward. Not menacing, not subtle, just there. By 2 p.m., the street buzzed with quiet confusion. Whispers passed through driveways. Photos were taken. One teenager live-streamed the whole thing, calling Clayton the realest dude in HOA history. Beverly didn't appear until 3:15. She came walking up the street, stiff-backed phone in hand, barking something into the receiver. But the second she saw the tank, her words faltered. She stopped walking. Her mouth opened, then closed. She crossed the street, almost trembling with fury, and stormed up to Clayton, who stood with arms folded on his front lawn. "What?" she hissed. "Is that a historic display?" he said calmly. "Temporary, compliant. That's a tank, I know." "You can't," she began, holding up her phone. He handed her the copy of Section 9.4. She snatched it, skimmed the words, then crumpled the paper. "You're making a mockery of this neighborhood." Clayton didn't flinch. "I'm protecting my driveway." She stormed off without another word, leaving behind only the sound of her heels cracking on the concrete like brittle glass. Clayton stood there long after she left, watching the sun sink low behind the steel silhouette in his driveway. And the tank stayed put, unmoving, undeniable, and very, very visible. By the next morning, the tank had become the neighborhood's worst-kept secret. It wasn't just the kids posting pictures anymore. It was realtors whispering about reputational concerns, HOA board members receiving calls from confused property investors, and a few residents who had started to quietly smile when they passed Clayton's house, not because they loved the tank, because they hated the queen. Beverly Danforth, despite her perfect posture and practiced tone, was beginning to fray at the edges. She spent most of the day marching from home to home, fielding complaints she once would have silenced with a citation. But now, they weren't afraid. They were annoyed. People wanted answers. Why could she block a driveway with a luxury car for official business, but a registered veteran couldn't park a museum-grade display on his own property? Her answers were vague, legal-sounding, but no longer convincing. She tried calling an emergency board meeting. Only 3 members showed up. One claimed the flu. Another cited a conflict of principle, and the last simply walked out 5 minutes in after she raised her voice. That night, Beverly called the police. Clayton was outside when the cruiser arrived, not pacing, not filming, just standing beside the tank with a cup of coffee. The officer, young and composed, stepped out and gave the machine a long look. "Sir," he said, "we've had a complaint about heavy military equipment on residential property." Clayton nodded and handed him a folder. Inside were registration papers, a statement of non-weaponized status, and most importantly, a highlighted copy of Section 9.4. The officer read slowly, then looked at the tank, then at Clayton. "This is legal," he muttered. "Correct." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You're not planning to move it anytime soon, are you?" "Soon," Clayton said. "But not yet." "Well, I've got no grounds to stop you." The officer looked amused. "Honestly, this might be the most peaceful tank I've ever seen." From across the street, Beverly watched the exchange through a gap in her blinds. The following morning, things escalated, but not from Clayton's side. It began with a simple act. Beverly's Lamborghini was parked again, diagonally. This time not just across Clayton's driveway but against the tank's treads. It wasn't a full block. It was a dare. People noticed. Neighbors stepped out quietly. Lawn chairs appeared on porches. One woman brought out a cooler. Someone else streamed live on social media again, narrating. Day 3 of the suburb standoff, Lambo versus tank. Clayton didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply walked out onto his lawn with a metal folding chair and sat down under the tree, facing the scene like it was a parade float, and then the whispers began. Jerry, the old man with the surgery scars, stepped outside and gave a thumbs up. Miriam waved from her front steps. "You need lemonade, Clayton." "I'm good," he called back. A teenager shouted, "Bet the tank wins." And from her porch, Beverly trembled with barely restrained fury. She had always ruled with paperwork, fine print, and silence. But this was loud, public. Worse than resistance, it was attention. She didn't control. She dialed the non-emergency police line again. "This is a safety hazard," she said. Someone could get hurt, but there was no citation. No siren, no resolution, just more silence. By dusk, a small circle of neighbors had formed on the sidewalk across the street. Quiet, polite, but present. Their eyes weren't on the tank anymore. They were on her. Inside her house. Beverly sat in the dark, phone in hand, flipping through social media comments. They weren't kind. They weren't even neutral, and worst of all, they were laughing. Laughing at her car. Laughing at her power. Laughing at the queen. She stared out the window, gripping her wine glass so tightly it creaked. Outside, the tank didn't move. Clayton didn't blink, and as night fell, something inside her cracked. Tomorrow, she thought, would be different. But it wouldn't be better. The sun rose slowly on day 4. But it wasn't the dawn that woke the neighborhood. It was the rumble, at 6:43 a.m. Clayton climbed into the M60 Patton, flicked a series of switches, and turned the starter. The engine roared to life like an awakened beast, exhaust hissed, the frame shuddered, and every house on the street vibrated just enough to draw open every curtain. The tank didn't move yet, it just idled, but the sound made a statement, one that carried across hedges, lawns, and freshly waxed sedans. Within minutes, Beverly emerged, not in her usual perfectly pressed linen or sculpted sunglasses. She wore joggers, mismatched shoes, a hoodie with the community logo half-zipped. She looked tired. Still, she made her way across the street, dodging the tank's plume of heat, and stepped right up to Clayton's lawn where he stood beside the running war machine. "You can't do this," she shouted over the rumble. "I'm doing it. This is harassment. I call it reclaiming space." She pointed at the tank. "You think this makes you untouchable?" Clayton didn't flinch. "I think it makes my driveway mine again." That's when she did something no one expected. She took a step forward and kicked the tank. Her foot hit metal with a dull thud, followed by a sharp yelp of pain. She stumbled back, clutching her toes, face flushed red. Across the street, someone gasped. Another person laughed quietly. "Get it off this street," she shrieked, eyes wide with desperation now. "You're terrorizing me." Clayton calmly reached into the tank and flipped a switch. A speaker mounted on the side crackled, and then a voice came through, not his, but the official recording from her last board meeting. Her voice echoed through the neighborhood. "If any resident fails to follow direction from the board, they'll be held accountable. The rules apply to everyone. No exceptions." Then another clip. "HOA regulations supersede personal convenience. If you don't like it, move." And finally, "I'm not afraid of consequences. I am the consequence." Beverly froze. Clayton turned the speaker off. The neighborhood stood still. No cars moved. No one spoke, and then, applause. It started slow. A clap from Jerry's porch. Another from a young father near the mailbox cluster. Then louder, fuller. It wasn't a party, it was a verdict. Beverly backed away, like the applause was fire. She looked around as if realizing, maybe for the first time, that she was outnumbered. Inside her home, she made another call. Not to the HOA hotline. This time, to her lawyer. The tank didn't move, but the ground beneath her control had shifted. Later that afternoon, an envelope appeared on Clayton's porch. No stamp, just tucked neatly under a stone. Inside was a formal complaint, this time not from Beverly but from an interim compliance officer. It requested removal of the tank by end of day Sunday and offered an opportunity to discuss peaceful transition of representation. Clayton smiled. It was the closest thing to a surrender he'd ever seen on HOA letterhead, but he wasn't finished. At 4:15 p.m. he rolled the tank forward. Not far. Just enough to perfectly block Beverly's Lambo in her driveway. The exact position hers had been in days earlier. He placed 4 wooden safety cones around it and hung a laminated sign on the tank's side. Temporary historic display. For community education. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't gloat. He just sat back in his folding chair, cracked open a cold soda, and watched as Beverly stared at her own blocked driveway, jaw trembling, unable to form words. Neighbors gathered again, not out of spite, but out of quiet admiration. The balance had shifted. Something was happening in Alder Ridge Estates that hadn't happened in years. Accountability. And the war wasn't fought with lawyers or fines. It was fought with silence, presence, and steel. By the 6th day, The tank wasn't just a neighborhood curiosity. It had become something bigger. It was a line in the sand, one drawn not with spray paint or petitions, but treads and steel. Clayton hadn't said much since the tank first appeared. He didn't need to. His silence said more than any HOA memo ever had. But Beverly had started talking more. Too much, maybe. She was seen pacing up and down the block with her phone glued to her ear, snapping photos of people's homes, garden beds, mailbox flags, even Halloween decorations that hadn't yet been taken down. Every call was the same. Violation. 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 Neighbors were no longer amused. They were annoyed. And now, they were speaking up. Someone sent an anonymous email blast with time-stamped screenshots of Beverly's own violations, her Lambo partially parked on the sidewalk, improper trash bin storage, and photos from the mixer she hosted, clearly showing more than the community guest limit. Someone else made color copies of HOA bylaws and circled sections in red, then left them taped to mailboxes with sticky notes reading, "Rule applies to all, even the Queen." That night, the HOA forum, once a ghost town of rule reminders and plant watering tips, lit up with comments. Some defended Beverly, but most didn't. People shared their stories. Fines they paid without question, apologies they made just to avoid escalation. They started calling her the Empress behind her back. And Clayton didn't post a thing. He was sitting quietly in the garage, going over the tank's manual, just in case. He had no intention of moving it yet, but he wanted to be ready if he did. At 9:04 p.m., a knock came at his door. Not aggressive, almost uncertain. He opened it to find Miriam, the neighbor with the toddler, standing there, clutching a file folder. "I know it's late," she said, "but people are organizing something." Clayton tilted his head. She opened the folder. Inside were signed forms, vote of no confidence declarations. More than a dozen already. People were ready to remove Beverly from the board entirely. "I don't want to lead anything," Clayton said. "I'm not running for office." "You don't have to," Miriam replied. "You already changed everything." He looked at the signatures, some in neat script, others rushed and jagged, but all of them, done. Real. Tired of pretending things were fine, he took a breath. "How many more do you need?" "3. "I'll get you 6, he said. The next morning, Beverly stepped onto her front porch and immediately froze. Her Lambo was still blocked, but now, her mailbox had a note duct-taped to it. Big, bold, handwritten, "HOA meeting, tonight, public, mandatory, votes will be counted." She yanked it down and turned toward Clayton's house. He was sitting in his usual chair beneath the shade tree, sipping coffee, the tank behind him silent but looming. She stormed across the street, waving the paper like a flag. "You think you're funny?" she snapped. Clayton shrugged. "Don't need to be. Just need to be consistent. You've made a circus out of this neighborhood. I didn't start it. I just stopped pretending it wasn't happening." She looked around. 3 neighbors were already watching. 2 more walked, dogs down the opposite sidewalk. Everyone knew, and the worst part for Beverly wasn't the meeting, it was the silence. No one defended her anymore. That evening, the HOA clubhouse was packed. More people than ever before. Folding chairs lined the walls, and even the hallway outside had a small cluster of residents leaning in to listen. Clayton didn't sit near the front. He stood in the back, arms crossed, next to Jerry and Rico. Beverly walked in last, still dressed sharp, but her eyes darted around like a hunted animal. The meeting began, but the script was gone. No ceremonial welcome. No gentle tone. Miriam stepped up to the microphone. She read off the violations, the abuses of power, the ignored appeals. Then she opened the floor. What followed wasn't chaos, it was truth. Quiet voices, nervous voices, strong ones, but all saying the same thing. It was time. And then came the vote. No shouting, no debate, just a count, and just like that, the Queen had no crown. The room didn't cheer. No one clapped. There wasn't any need. Beverly's name was removed from the HOA president's seat by majority vote 23 in favor, 2 against, and 3 abstaining. She stood in the center of the clubhouse like a statue no one knew what to do with. Still upright, still made of stone, but forgotten. Miriam handed her the official statement, already printed and signed. "You're welcome to remain a resident," she said, voice calm, but effective immediately. "You're no longer on the board. Please turn in the HOA laptop and passcode credentials within 72 hours. Beverly didn't take the paper. She didn't respond. She just turned and walked out of the building without saying a word. That was the last time she was seen in public that week. The next morning, the Lamborghini was gone. So was the snide glance from across the lawn, the citations folded under, door handles, the clipboard tapping against her hip like a badge. The air felt easier, like the neighborhood had exhaled for the first time in years. Clayton walked out to check his mailbox and found something unexpected, a small basket sitting on the step. Inside was a neatly folded note. Thanks for reminding all of us what standing up looks like. No signature. No address. But it wasn't the only one. 3 other neighbors waved as he walked by. One gave a small salute. Even the teenage live streamer shouted, "Legend." From across the street, for Clayton, it wasn't about praise. It was about the shift. The fear that once sat over Alder Ridge like smog had started to lift by noon. He rolled the tank back 5 feet. Just enough to let the street breathe again. Then he lowered the flagpole he'd mounted on its rear and folded the stars with care. The job was nearly done, but there was still one matter left. Inside his garage, Clayton retrieved the HOA's original bylaw packet, the one Beverly had quietly amended over the years. It was watermarked with the community's original logo and signed by the first founding board from nearly 2 decades ago. He had copies made. That evening, he walked the packet down to the new interim president, a man named Darnell, soft-spoken and fair, who worked in city planning by day. "This is what the community signed up for," Clayton said, handing him the binder. "It's time the board started following it again." Darnell nodded. "It's a solid foundation. We'll build from this." He meant it. You could hear it in his voice at 6:03 p.m. Just as the sky was starting to darken into gold, a delivery van pulled into Beverly's driveway. The driver stepped out and rang her doorbell. No answer. He tried again. After a minute, he shrugged and left a crate on her front step, long, narrow, and heavy-looking. He marked it on his tablet and drove off. Curiosity stirred. Neighbors watched from behind curtains and porch rails, wondering what Beverly had ordered. But no one went over. No one knocked. The box sat there all night. By morning, it was still untouched. Around noon, Clayton heard an engine outside and stepped out just in time to see a flatbed trailer heading back down the street, Rico's truck. The tank was loaded, up once more, flag packed, everything clean and strapped down. "You sure you're done with it?" Rico asked, stepping out to shake Clayton's hand. Clayton nodded. It served its purpose. Rico smirked. "Did more than that. This whole street feels different." As they loaded the last of the gear, Clayton noticed something across the road. Beverly's blinds, always angled just right to spy on the street, were closed. Fully shut, not a sliver of light. The Queen had retreated to her castle. But no one was asking her to come back out. At 5:17 p.m., the tank was gone. Just the tire marks on the driveway remained, a fading symbol of resistance made with dignity, not noise. And for the first time in years, no one was afraid of their HOA. No one was afraid to plant flowers to bright. No one worried if their shutters were slightly off shade. Clayton sat on his porch, sipping iced tea, and Alder Ridge felt like a neighborhood again, not a battlefield. The tank was gone, but its presence lingered. People still talked about it, not loudly, not boastfully, but like a landmark had once rolled through their street and left truth in its tracks. The kind of story passed over fences with a knowing nod and half a grin. But while the neighbors returned to planting, grilling, and living, Beverly Danforth stayed quiet. Her once perfect hedges grew uneven. The Lambo hadn't been seen since the morning after the meeting, and her porch lights, which used to flick on at precisely 6:42 every evening, now stayed dark. For a week, no one saw her. Until one morning, a white sedan with tinted windows pulled up in front of her house. 2 men in slacks stepped out. One held a briefcase, the other, a manila folder. Neither wore a smile. They knocked on her door. No response. But the door opened a crack, then fully, revealing Beverly, not as a queen anymore, but something smaller, tired, faded. They entered, and stayed, for nearly 3 hours. Across the street, Clayton didn't watch. He was too busy rebuilding the side gate that had warped during last winter's freeze. But Rico texted him a photo taken discreetly from his car. To IRS agents. Audit Division. Clayton didn't respond. He just deleted the photo and went back to hammering. That weekend, an email went out to all Alder Ridge residents. Not from the board, but from the city records office. Subject: Notice of active investigation. Alder Ridge, HOA funds it. Detailed: discrepancies in financial reports, unauthorized expenses, and missing receipts from past projects. Underneath it all was one name: Beverly L. Danforth. It turned out, the reason Beverly had fought so hard to stay in power wasn't pride alone. It was paperwork, or lack of it. Thousands of dollars meant for landscaping, community events, and sidewalk repairs had quietly vanished across the last 3 years. Checks made out to vendors that didn't exist. Contracts signed with no witnesses. No one had noticed or dared to ask because she buried it under a mountain of rules, forms, and silence. Until Clayton rolled in with 57 tons of patience and gave the neighborhood something she couldn't bury. Attention, 2 weeks later, a moving van arrived. Small, no crew, just Beverly herself, slowly loading boxes in the early morning light, sunglasses on, head down. No one helped. No one stopped her. She left as quietly as she once ruled. The Lambo was towed 2 days later, seized by court order as part of a asset investigation. On the first Saturday of the new month, the community held a picnic, not at the clubhouse but on the very lawn where Clayton's tank once sat. No one made speeches. No one brought up citations. People just showed up. Miriam brought lemonade. Jerry brought a chessboard. Rico manned the grill. Even the live teen showed up with actual food instead of a phone, and Clayton. He sat in his lawn chair under the old oak tree. Same spot. No tank. Just a paper plate of ribs, and a slight smirk that came and went like a breeze. As the sun dipped low, a little boy ran up to him and asked, "Mister, was that your tank?" Clayton leaned forward. "It was on loan. Why'd you park it here?" He paused, looked at the yard, the kids, the calm. "Sometimes," he said, "the only way to get peace is to remind people what happens when it's gone." The boy blinked, nodded like he understood more than he should have, and ran off. Clayton leaned back and closed his eyes. Narrator: final words. Some people send emails. Some people file complaints. But every once in a while, someone brings a tank, and not to destroy anything, but to show that mercy can be massive, and silence can be loud. And the rules, they go both ways.